Okay, and we are recording. Let me move that. Okay, so welcome to the first MOG, Museum of Gaming History, video seminar. And it's not going to be a lecture tonight. I want it to be more of a discussion. So it would be great if we could have everybody's audio on so we could ask questions um, by voice. But the problem is when we do that, what happens is we hear all the background noise and it gets to be distracting. So instead, we have a chat feature. And if you want to ask me a question, use the chat feature, and we'll do it that way. And maybe at the end, when we're finished, we could continue with voice discussion. But during the webinar, we will be asking questions by chat. So again, this is not a lecture. I want it to be a discussion, but we can't do voice discussions because of all the background noise. Instead, we will discuss by chat. And what I wanted to share with you tonight is stuff that I've learned by organizing my collection using the ChipGuide. So what I want to do is explain what I had before and where I am now. So before, I kept track of my collection with a program on my PC. It was a database program that I've used for over 20 years. And it meets my needs back then. But what happens is that listing of all the chips in my collection is sitting on my desktop computer. It's not where I need it when I need it. So the problems that I had was that frequently I would see a chip while I'm at the convention or a show or something, and not having my database with me, I wouldn't know if I had it or not. And to be on the safe side, if it was a nice chip, I'd buy it, only to come back home and found out I already had it. So I've got lots and lots, hundreds of duplicates that I bought that way, not knowing that I already owned the chip. So that was one of the problems that I had. I, I would spend a lot of time making up lists of the chips that I was looking for, and they were typically new releases that came out over the last year that I would try to pick up at the chip show. But that takes a lot of time to put a list like that together, and if you want to do it with an image, it takes even longer. So the way that I did it originally was okay, but I needed something better. And if you see behind me, I'll move out of the way a little bit over here. What you see behind me is my chip collection. It's sitting in some IKEA furniture that I purchased. It's kind of like a bookshelf. It's got 4 levels, and on each level there are 4 cubby holes. And in each cubby hole, there's room for 8 double row boxes of chips. And most of the bottom is my collection, and the top part of it is my traders. So everything is in a 2.5 by 2.5 holder that goes into a red box like this. And if you see here, this is one of my boxes of Las Vegas chips. And if I open up one of the boxes and I pull out a chip, I keep each chip in a 2.5 by 2.5. And what I do is I write the chip guide number on one corner, and if it's a Nevada chip, I also write the chip rack number on the other corner. So that's what I've been doing and how I've been storing it. And when I came out with the My Collection feature of the chip guide, I think it's been about a year and a half, 2 years now. Um, I've got something like 13,000, 14,000 chips in the collection. It would be a huge undertaking, and I did it very little until we were in quarantine and I didn't have as much to do as I used to do. So I've been going through every one of these boxes. It takes about 2 hours to go through a box and make sure that I've got the chip guide number recorded on it. And the other thing that I do is I go onto the chip guide and press the My Collection button so it goes into my collection on chip guide. So that's what I've been doing. That was my project. So what I'd like to do now is switch from looking at me to looking at the chip guide. What I'm going to do is share content, screen one, and now you should all be seeing the chip guide. So let me show you what I started doing and some tricks and techniques that I learned along the way, and how things could be a lot easier for you um, in managing and organizing your collections. So let's take out that chip that I had before, the Luxor from Nevada. I'll click on Nevada and go to Luxor. And then when I go down and page down, and now this is the chip that I showed you. And if you can see here, the My Collection button here is green, which means I came here and clicked this button, and now it's in my collection. So when I look at my collection, I can see that I have that chip. So I was doing this box by box by box, and the boxes are organized um, by location and by the types of casinos, but I think I'm going to change that and just organize it by location. So right now I have all the riverboat chips together. I've got all the Indian casinos together, um, but I think I want to break that up. And I've got card rooms together, so I would think I want to break that up and put them by state rather than um, by the type of casinos that they are. Um, so in the beginning, what I would do is I'd take out a box, and let's say this was a box of Nevada chips, and the first chip here was Luxor. I take out a stack of chips and go through each one looking for the chip on the chip guide, uh, checking it off, and then when I go to the next casino, I've got to go back to Nevada and go back to L, and after Luxor, I would go to the Las Vegas Hilton and do it all again. And I found that that was extremely time consuming, going from um, one casino to the next through um, through the page of all the casinos in the state. So I found an easier way to do that. And let me show you what that easier way is. And that's using the ChipGuide query facility. So I'll bring up the query facility. And I guess it's a little slow tonight, but there it is. So if I'm doing all my Las Vegas $1 chips, I can just pull up a list of all the Vegas dollar chips. So the collectible type is chips, denomination is $1. That's what I mainly collect. And I choose United States. And now it gives me a list of all the chips in the United States. And I want Nevada. And then I want Las Vegas. So now I've got all the Las Vegas chips sitting in front of me. I don't have to go from one casino to another casino. They're all here. So I just go through the Aladdin's, and when I finish Aladdin's, then I go through Ambassador and so forth, and I could click on which ones are in my collection or not right here um, on the ChipGuide query facility. So I know I have this chip. I haven't gotten to that box yet, but I'll click on it, and that's how easy it is putting the item in my collection. And then after I've gone through a location like this, the next step is figuring out, hello? Somebody needs to mute themselves.
Somebody needs to.
And hold on, I'll figure out who that is. Okay,
And hold on.
okay, we're good. So um, the next thing I would do is go through to figure out which ones I want to put on my want list. So here's a chip. I know I have it, but it's in a different box. And what I'm going to do is click on it. So now that it's on my want list. And by doing that, I now am creating my collection list and my want list. And if I want to see things that are on my Las Vegas want list, I just go to the list drop down, hit query, and there are 165 dollar chips that I'd like to find. So this is my Vegas want list, and I could do the same thing with my collection. And this is my Vegas collection that you're looking at. And not only can you look at all of this, your collection and your want list and your trade lists like this, um, but you can fine tune it a little bit. Let's say you only collect chips with aerodye molds, which are one of my specialties. You can select a mold like aerodyes, and I would, let's say, want $1 aerodyes from every place. And now here is a list of all the $1 aerodye chips, and you see that I've been here before because every one is either in my collection or it's one that I'm looking to get. I don't know what the attraction is really for aerodye chips, but there's something about them. The other mold that I really like is a large crown mold, and I could run the same query for large crown mold, and here are all the $1 large crown mold chips that are on the chip guide. And as you can see, I've been here before because the same thing, everyone is either in my collection or that this is my collection. Let's look at all of them on the chip guide. There are quite a few more. So yeah, these are large crown mold chips that I'd like to find as well. So um, I've gone through what I've done. I've gone through my collection box by box. And I don't know how many hours, but it's something like 73 boxes in 2 hours a box. So that's kind of like a month's worth of work if you were working 8 hours a day, 20 something hours, 20 days a week. So I've devoted a lot of time but there are benefits to it because now I can see my collection, know what I have, know what I want, any place that I have a cell phone signal or a Wi-Fi signal. So when I'm at the convention, if I see a chip that I don't know if I have in my collection or not, I could just look it up on my phone. It's that easy. Um, so let's say I did see this chip. I would Method I would use is I come to California. I look for Eagle Club. Here it is. I come down and here's that chip. And I'd see, it's on my want list. Yeah, I don't have it in my collection. This is one that I'd like to get. Oh, and here's another one I want to put in my want list. I didn't know there was a yellow one as well, small crown. Okay. And let's say you saw this Eagle Club and you didn't know where it was from. So you didn't know to go to California to look for it. How would you find it? Well, there is a casino search function on the chip guide. And if I key in Eagle and press search, I would find all of the casinos that have the word Eagle in them. And this was a large crown chip. So I'd be looking for a large crown chip. And sure enough, here's an eagle with a large crown. So I could click on that and that will take me to this chip. So that's how I locate chips when I don't know where they're from. So by doing this, by going through my entire collection, by putting it on the chip guide, I can um, create my collection list, my want list, and have those available to me wherever I am. So it'll eliminate um, buying duplicate chips. It'll also save me a lot of time because before I go to the convention, I don't have to create lists of chips I want to buy. It's already on the chip guide. Oh, and there is one other benefit of this. The chip guide has a trade maker function. So when I press trade maker, I'm going to select my want list and the chip guide is going to check everybody else's trade lists to see if there's a match between what I'm looking for and what somebody has to trade. So if, let's see, I think Doug is actually on the call tonight. Right, Doug? So what I'm going to do is select Doug, and it's going to show me a bunch of chips, well, there are 4 of them, that Doug has in his extras of that he's willing to trade and chips that I'm looking for. So now that I have that, what I'd like to do is send Doug an email. So I click on the create email, and what I want to do is select with chips. I want to select off of here, um, and I'm going to select that one, and this one, and this one. I'm pretty sure I have that. I have to check and make sure why it's on my want list. And then I click create email, and it formats an email. Hi, Doug. I'm interested in trading for the items from your trade list. And um, note that the images are from the chip guide, not the actual images. I understand that. But let me send you an email. And it sent the email. And now I could start over again and go find another collector to make a trade with. So if everybody does this, everybody puts up their want list and their trade lists, then people could be making trades all the time through their um, through the trade maker facility. And okay, so we did that. We did that. Are there any questions? Ask me questions in the chat box. Is it easy to? It's easy to use and understand. All you need to really do, start off doing, is go through your collection, find those items on the chip guide. How do I find grand opening chips from Ron? Grand opening chips are limited edition chips, so they're all thrown in together. And I like the suggestion because maybe we need to, um, um, maybe we can figure that out. But um, so let's go. All right. So how would I find? Let's go back to the query facility, and the collectible type would be limited edition chips. Any specific area for uh, Ron for the geos, or is that from Albert? All the states. So I would select the location, United States, and let's say I wanted $5 grand opening chips. So there are a lot of limited edition chips. The grand opening chips are going to be in here. And maybe what we need to do is here. Oh, there is an event. So it's actually easier than I thought. I already did this. So you would pick grand opening as an event. It's a meaning that it's one of the limited edition types and hit query. And now you are looking at all the grand opening chips, $5 grand opening chips in the United States. So thanks for the question, and that's the answer. Is that okay? Other questions. Earlier you did a search by mold type. I noticed that there's a field, drop-down field. I can only select one entry from it. We can make mold so that you could select more than one, but the problem that I found is if I do that, then it's open, mold is open a certain amount of time. I'd have to figure out a different way to do it because it won't work in this format. But that is a good suggestion. And what I'll do is I'll keep the chat feature. I'll keep the questions here and I'll work on them afterwards because this is how we find what collectors want and how we improve the chip guide by taking these questions and figuring out ways to do it. Is there a way of finding geos that are not on the chip guide yet? We could only work with what's on the chip guide, so I don't know that it's possible to to do that. And what you have to do is if you have a chip that's not on the chip guide, you've got to submit it to the chip guide, and then we will get it um, on we'll get it on the chip guide, and you'll be able to search for it there. And multi-denominations might also be helpful. Well, I thought that there might be a need for that. So I did put in 125, 1525, and 100. So you have the ability of doing selecting those numbers. And I think there's another group number, fractionals. So anything under $1 and high. I think high probably means under none found. So let's not limit it to grand opening chips. So yeah, so I think high means over $100. So there are some groupings that we put together, um, but I'd have to do some research to figure out how to do multiple selections in a drop down. But that is a good suggestion. I appreciate it. And it might be good for denoms and might be good for a lot of things, molds and colors as well. And colors, I'm going to say the data is only good as what we put in there. And I try and tell the administrators to use basic colors. Um, even though there might be a more accurate description, like this true color of this chip is chartreuse, I can't have every possible color in a drop down because there are thousands of them, and then you won't be able to do it. So I ask administrators to put in a basic color and either light or dark, and that will make it easier for collectors to find it. But there were a lot of chips that were on there before we started those guidelines and a lot of odd colors. So, um, so finding chips by color won't give you perfect results. I'm sure of that. You would have to do search, let's say, by navy. Let me get out of that. And you would probably have to search by blue to make sure you find what you're looking for. Okay, looking at the questions, search on mold type. Is there a way to print out queries? Meaning you'd like to print out this page? And it's an interesting question. You're not the first person to think of it. And um, the answer is it is certainly possible to do it. And I've got a version of the ChipGuide where I can do it. I could actually print out the whole list, and I could also save the results as a spreadsheet. So, um, but the reasons we limit that function is because of it makes the data in the chip guide less secure. And you can also then, let's say, print out a guide to the chips of some state and um, interfere with authors who are producing books, guidebooks for those locations. So what we decided is we want the authors to continue to be able to um, producing their guidebooks and not interfere with their activities by having you giving you the ability to do the same thing on the chip guide. But it's something that we've discussed and we can do. Um, when PDF technology gets better and we could actually really lock down a PDF so nobody can copy it or do anything else with it, then we might be able to do that. But the technology isn't there now. So we are restricting the ability to do that. What is step one of creating your collection with a guide? Good question. So the question is, how do I get started? And the best way to get started is there's a link that we put up over here called My Collection Information. And um, right there is actually what the information that you need to get started. You have to be a member of the ChipGuide. ChipGuide membership is available to anybody who's a member of the club. And what you do is, I can't show you here because I'm logged on, but if you're logged off, there's a link over here that says something like request membership. And that'll bring you to a page where you fill out information about yourself, basically your name, your club membership number, and your email address, and send it to us, and then we approve it, and you have a Chip Guide ID. So that's what it takes to become a member of the Chip Guide. Then you log on, and once you log on, it activates all these features. So you won't see the membership here, you'll see all these features that become available once you log on. And the other thing that happens when you log on is when you go to um, a casino, these buttons appear. The My Collection button, the Want List button, the Trade List button, and we'll talk about this last button a little bit later towards the end of the seminar. But if you're logged on, the chip guide knows you're logged on, and then it presents these buttons, and all you have to do is start clicking on them. Red means it's not in your collection. Green means it is in your collection. And all you got to do is click on it, and it puts it in your collection and takes you out. And the same thing with My Collection, Want List, and Trade List. You just find the item and you click on it. And you could find it by going through there, and you can also find it, as I showed you, by using the query facility. So that was a good question. Let me go back to my collection information. So here are the steps, here are the details, and everything that you need to know is there. And then what you can do. Now, one thing I didn't show you is when you go to the ChipGuide query facility, if you're logged on, then you get this drop down that says which list do you want to see? Do you want to see the entire chip guide, or do you want to see somebody's collection or want list or trade list? And know that all these people, we keep your information private to you unless you go in and tell us that you want to share your list with other people. So if we see John here said, I'll let people see my want list, I'll let people see my trade list, but not his collection. It's completely up to you what you want to share with people. And the way that you do that is through the list manager. So what you would do is if you wanted somebody to see your list, you could either select everybody or you could select another chip guide member. So this is the list of everybody that currently can see it. So if I select everybody, it says I'm letting everybody see all my lists because they're all in green. If I didn't want people to see my collection, I turn it off. And when I go back to ChipGuide Query Facility, well, I can see it, so that wasn't a fair thing to show. But nobody else can see it right now because I turned it off. But I could see my own. Let's go back. List Manager. So everybody and so forth. But let's say I wanted to give special privileges, not to everybody, but to certain people. I would select that person. Let's see, where's Albert Scalzo here? Oh, it's my last name. So there's Albert. And what I do is I would say, okay, I want Albert to see my trade list. And now he has the privilege to see my trade list. It's as easy as that. So List Manager is what permits you, which allows you to let other people see your lists. Again, you could select everybody or a particular user and um, allow them to see them. Now, since I'm letting everybody see it, okay, Barry's there. Okay, no special ones. Okay. So I'm letting everybody see everything. All right, any other questions? How do we request TCR numbers? And I'm not sure what you mean by request TCR numbers. Ed, could you explain that a little bit further? Okay, I'm waiting for Ed to get back to me. But one thing that I did promise is that you were going to see a preview of a new feature on the chip guide. And that new feature is the top 10 feature. And this is a preview. We're not ready to roll it out yet. Um, the way it's set up right now, it's you could have a top 10 list and anything that you want that's on the chip guide could be on your top 10 list. We've got some further clarification on that. Originally it was only supposed to be for chips and chip-like items like chetons and plaques and tokens and stuff. Um, but now we're going to let you have a top 10 list of any kind of collectible um, maintained separately. So you could have your top 10 matchbooks and top 10 ashtrays and so forth. So let's see how your top 10 list works. And it's very much like the way Jim Follis was running that. And I've worked with Jim to implement that. He thought it was a good idea. So he's helping me a lot with that. And let's take a look at it. So let's start with how do you do it? And you do it the same way that you do it for your other lists, for your My Collection You Want list and your trade list. If this was one of your top 10 chips that you wanted to designate, you would click on the TT button here and it would add it to your top 10 list. Now, I already have my top 10 list in place, so it's not going to let me add number of 11, but I'll show you how I do that. Now, once you put things into your top 10 list, then what happens? What happens is there's going to be a new link on the chip guide called Top 10s to 100. That's the name that Jim Follis gave to it. And when you do that, you come up with the screen, and on the screen it asks you to select one of the collectors that have put their top 10 lists on the chip guide. And I'm going to pick mine. And now it shows you my top 10 chips. This is my list of top 10 chips. So um, let's go to the next collector. You only put in one. Here's Steve Miller's. And the collectors that you're seeing here, they're actually ChipGuide administrators. They've been helping me test out this function. So a lot of the administrators put their top 10 lists on. And what we'll be doing is we'll be gathering statistics because what we can do is we can see how many people have this chip on their top 10 lists, and we could find out which chips are the most popular chips with collectors and provide you with those statistics. But we got to get people using the function first before we roll that out. So what I will be doing right now, it's only chips, but when we roll this out, it'll have additional function, and the additional functions will be you'll be able to have a list for each collectible type. So there'll be another drop down here that will say, once you select a person, what kind of list do you want to see? Do you want to see their chips or ashtrays or matchbooks or whatever you want to see that they've put on their top 10 list? And that will be one thing that'll be addition. And the other thing that'll be an addition is you'll be able to rank which chip comes in which order. So if this is your favorite chip, you'll be able to say, make that my number one chip, and this is my number two chip, and so forth from 1 till 10. So you'll be able to have your ranked list of top 10, and it'll be easy to move them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put an up arrow and a down arrow here, and if where it is not where you want it to be, if you want it to be higher, you hit the up arrow and it'll move over, or you hit the down arrow and it'll move down the list. So I want to make these things as easy to use as possible with only a simple click to make it happen. And that's what we will be rolling out. I imagine it'll take me a few more days before I'm ready to do it. So look for it over the weekend or maybe sometime next week. But you are the first collectors to see this new function. Front and back if different would be nice. Well, if front and back is different, you will see a side 2 notice over here. So if you want to see the other side, you just click on side 2 and then side 2 will pop up. But I appreciate that question. That was from Steve Miller. So, yep, you could see, well, this one is the same. Oh no, it's got the serial number. This portion is a little bit different. So it is. So yes, if you want to see the back of a chip, if both sides are different, there's this little indicator here that uh, if when you click on it, you could see the other side of the chip. Okay, good questions. My top 10 was made up of chips of what I have, which is different from all chips. Okay, what if a chip on your top 10 is not on the guide? Good question, Ron. Then submit it to the guide. Have you know, we've got probably several hundred different collectors. Let me go to contributors. I don't know if we count, but there are an awful lot of contributors. And you know what? We don't keep a count, but oh no, 1,171 different people have made contributions to the chip guide. So if you find something in your collection while you're going through and putting it on the guide, like I have, and one of the things that took me 2 hours to go through each one of these boxes was every time I went through a box, I found several chips in my collection that were not on the chip guide. And what I would do is put them on the side, and when I finished with the box, I would take those chips, go over to the scanner, put them on the scanner, scan them in, and then put them on the chip guide. Now you can't put them on the chip guide directly, but you could do the submissions. And if you're not familiar with it, there is a submission form, and it's fairly easy to use. If you're logged on, we know your name and email. We'll fill that in for you. You don't have to type it in. And if you want to be anonymous, you could be anonymous. You don't have to fill that in at all. You see it says optional here. Type the name that's on the chip, the type of casino you think it is. That'll help us to find it, where it's from, state and region and city if you know that, what you're submitting. It's a chip, and we really want you to help us with the color. So sometimes color is not needed. If it's something um, that that we don't collect by color, like a slot card. But we'd like you to tell us what color it is because it's not always apparent to know what color it is. And if it's Brown, you could say it's brown or dark brown or light brown. That'll help us. And any comments that will help us with this, knowledge you have about this item that will help us when we put it on the chip guide. You click here, attach the image, and then press submit, and it goes into submission queues. And we've got some extra time. Um, I will show you. This is the portion of the chip guide that collectors don't see. This is the portion of the chip guide that the administrators use to work on the chip guide. So this is our current submission list, and you can see these are all the people who have submitted items to chip guide. There's a list here. It shows the information that you put in. That's why we ask you to put in the information. It helps the administrators because they do the submissions by their location or their type of submission. For instance, all the slot cards are done um, by Bob, and um, so people either have locations or they have types of submissions that they handle. That's why we ask for the information. So when we look at the list of all the items, we know which administrator is going to work on it. And if we're going to work on one, we press on the submission, and then we see what was submitted, all the information, the comments, uh, the size, this was used in the poker room, and then the submission. And this is how we process the submissions. So, um, okay. So, good question about what do you if you find one that's in your collection but not on the chip guide, submit it. It's easy to do and it helps us and you get recognition for it. Another question. Is it possible to add a feature if we were looking for a chip that has been submitted as chip guide is not in anyone's trade list to click on it? Okay, so you want to know if you could get in contact with the submitter. So let's say I'm going to come back here and here's this chip and you want it and you know that Alex Salento has one. How can you get in touch with him? Um, it is possible. Um, we don't keep track of all the submitters' emails, and submitters don't even have to supply their emails if they don't want to. But what I'd suggest for now is to go onto the chipboard and get in contact with somebody that way. Um, if you remember the chip guide, we do have your email address. And maybe what I should do is, if the submitter is a member of the chip guide, make this a link so you could send them an email. But that's a good suggestion. If a chip is on the chip guide without a TCR number, how do we request a TCR so we add it to the guide? So this would be something new. Um, we work together with the chip rack people, and I did supply them with a program only for the chip rack people so they can look at Nevada chips that don't have chip rack TCR numbers assigned. And I don't know how much they do that. I haven't asked them recently, but that is one of the ways to do it. Another way to do it is if you make that comment in your submission when you submit that item to the chip guide, I can forward that over to the chip guide people, and they're more than happy to give a chip rack number to it. Okay, good question. Any additional questions? And by the way, sometimes what's happened is a chip was submitted to the chip guide. 3 years ago, and it was before it got into the chip rack. So we didn't have a TCR number when we put it in. But then time has passed and it's got into the chip rack, and nobody bothered to or knew to go back to this listing and look up the TCR number and put it in. So there's a very easy way. If you see a chip here and all these chips had numbers, but let's say this didn't have the TCR number here, but you knew what it was, just click on this update button right here. That's what the update button is. Click on that update button. It will tell me that you have an update for this item, and you say, oh, the TCR number for this chip is N1234. And when you hit send, it will send it to the administrator that handles that location. When they get the email, then they should do the update and add the TCR number to that item. Okay, I'm not actually going to do the send. Okay, any other questions? Can you explain why there are two competing databases, ChipRack and ChipGuide, in the first place? Shouldn't there only be one reference? Okay, so historically, the ChipRack was the first guide, and it came out as a price guide to help collectors understand what the value of Nevada chips are. And it was only in text. The chip guide started out as a guide for the riverboat casinos, so it only had 6 states. It had Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Those are the states that have riverboats. So the chip guide started out as only a guide for those 6 states that had riverboats. So remember, the chip rack was Nevada, the chip guide was the riverboats. While the originator of the chip guide, Greg Susan, was still alive, he expanded the chip guide into a few other areas. Nevada dollar chips, Maryland chips, and I think Indian reservation chips. And then he passed away. After he passed away, the chip guide was donated to the Museum of Gaming History, and that's how I got it. And since then, we've expanded the chip guide not just from its original 6 states and then the add-ons, but the entire world. And you know, the difference between the chip for Nevada chips, the difference between the chip guide and the chip rack is we've got the pictures of the chips, so you can actually see them. Um, and the chip rack, you only have the text. And by the way, here's a trick. Not everybody knows this, but if you want to see the chip rack, what you do is select Chips All, United States. Let's get there. Okay, and then Nevada. We've got 33,414 Nevada chips. And then you select from View to Text. And when you do that, here's the chip rack. Now, can't print it out because it's one page at a time. You'd have to print out 669 pages in order to have a copy of the chip rack without paying for it. And I don't think the trouble would be worth the effort, uh, especially because it changes every single day. So you can have it online. It's right here if you like looking at the chip rack format. Um, but and again on my special version of this, there are two more options: to save it as a PDF and to save it a um, as a spreadsheet. And of course, the chip guide does not do values. Um, so the chip rack is meant to be a value guide to Nevada's chips. The chip guide is meant to be an image catalog of all the chips. And we've had discussions about pricing. Now, the chip rack pricing is the opinion of the authors, and they're very knowledgeable and they're the best that are out there. Um, there's been constant comments over the years about shouldn't couldn't we have value information in the chip guide? And the answer is we could, but we only provide factual information, not opinions. So the value information is we could possibly collect public sales information and record those and make them available. That is something that we're thinking of doing, um, but it's just a tremendous effort because there are 250,000 items in the chip guide. How, and nobody knows the values. It's too much information to collect. Um, we need to find a way to do it, and we could do it, and then you could click on a chip and it could tell you this chip sold for auction in eBay on such and such a date for this price, or it sold in uh, the at the convention auction on this date for this price. So we could provide factual information, sales information, as long as it's public um, information, and it's something that we've been thinking about doing over the years, but never got um, the go ahead to want to do that. Any other questions? Why are some daily updates showing submitter who is no longer with us late in catching up, or um, that's probably because it was an update. When we have an item like this, it says contributed by Alex Salento. The first person to do a submission gets the contributed by designation. If later we were to update this with, let's say, better images, there would be a second contributor, and that would be the person who gave the additional information. But the original contributor stays the same. So if you've been seeing a submission um, by somebody who's passed, it's probably for that reason that there's been an update to one of their submissions. Does that answer that question? Okay. So I've showed you what I wanted to show you tonight. It was, explaining the process I went through to organize my collection. Um, and I thought I'd share what I learned with everybody, what the benefits were, doing it that way rather than the old way I was keeping track of things. And I gave you a preview of the new top 10 feature. Look for it to be rolled out um, next week sometime, if not before. And again, I appreciate everybody um, who joined us tonight. A couple of things I missed if I look at my notes. Um, what am I going to do with my collection feature after I finish doing all my chips and all the boxes? I've still got a few left to do. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is my traders. I've got several thousand traders. I want to go through them, my trade lists up, so I'll be able to make a bunch more trades with other collectors. And after that, I have a second collectible, and that's postcards. And I've got several thousand postcards to go through. And I'm sure a lot of them are not on the chip guide yet. So I'll be adding them to the chip guide and putting them on my collection feature, because for sure, when I find postcards, it's generally at an antique shop or something like that. And I buy duplicates all the time because I'm not sure if I have that postcard or not. It would be great if I'd get my phone out and look it up, see if I have it already, and then make a smart purchase. So what I'm going to do after I finish with all my chips is I'm going to get my traders up, and then after I finish my traders, I'll get my postcards up, and my entire collection will then be on the chip guide and available to me wherever I am. So I appreciate everybody joining me this evening. Um, I'm going to hopefully, let's see, unmute everybody now, if I can do that. Unmute all. And I'll say good night tonight. Good night to everybody. I really wish I was seeing you next month in Vegas for the convention, but we're going to have to wait until sometime in the future. So, missing everybody, and have a good night, and thanks for joining.
Good night, Charles.
Good night.
Thank you, Charles.
Good night, Charles. Thank you very much.
Good night, Charles.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.